You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
The 2022 midterms are here, but who will take control of Congress is anyone's guess. Hello and welcome to GHS-TV's award-winning coverage of Election Night 2022. I'm your moderator, Brandon Sewell, coming to you live from the campus of Germantown High School. We'll be on air and online tonight until 10 p.m., bringing you results from all the night's major races, including the battle for Tennessee governor. Will voters give Governor Bill Lee a second term in office, or will the red state flip blue and elect the political newcomer, Jason Martin? We'll be paying attention to all the close governor races like this one. But our coverage won't stop there. We're keeping our eye on Senate and House races across the country. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives are on the ballot, as well as 35 Senate seats. This year, as is the case every 2 years, voters decide who has the majority in both chambers of Congress. That means that the candidates voters choose tonight will determine, to a large degree, whether President Joe Biden can get any new policies passed, or if Republicans will gain the ability to block most things he wants to do. GHS-TV will also focus on the local elections that matter most to you, our viewers. And we'll talk with area politicians and newsmakers. On top of all of that, our student reporters will bring you stories from across Shelby County. Now, let's meet the anchors who will give us the latest on these national and local races. The races for municipal offices are shaping up to be the most contested in recent years. Tia Lyons has been studying the local ones that affect you. She's in Studio B with a look at the night ahead.
Hi, Brandon. Like you said, municipal races are exciting this year. Bartlett is set to have all new leadership with its first mayor in 20 years and 3 new aldermen. Meanwhile, there are 4 constitutional amendments up for Tennesseans to vote on. I'll break them down for you. And finally, in state house and Senate races, there was a big shakeup with the death of a local representative. I'll explain how that would affect the races coming up. But first, let's get to some of the results we already have. Starting off with the Bartlett mayor, well, we don't have any results yet, but we'll get to them later. This race is an open seat because Mayor Keith McDonald retired after 20 years in office. While there are 4 candidates, it's worth noting that David Parsons was endorsed by McDonald. Moving on to our next race that we have for Germantown mayor. While there are no results, Mike Palazzolo will win because this is the first time in his political career that he is unopposed. He is running for his 3rd term, and he says while campaign has slowed a little, he is still getting his steps in by going door to door. We're working to get more results for you, and I'll have those in the next half hour.
As of right now, Democrats are in control of the U.S. House of Representatives. But factors like redistricting and the economy could possibly give Republicans the opening they need to take control. Here with a look at whether that will happen is U.S. House of Representatives anchor Zabria McClain.
Republicans are hoping for a red wave this November. Democrats are currently in control of the House with 220 seats. Republicans only need to flip 7 seats to take over. In the wake of some of President Biden's more liberal policies, Republicans are even more determined to take control of the House of Representatives to help balance out the power in Washington. Another issue I'll be following is the effect the economy is having on the election. The U.S. has been on a sort of roller coaster with inflation this year, and that's expected to have an impact on the races. I do have 2 races I'd like to update you on. In Indiana's 1st congressional district, Democratic incumbent Frank Mervyn and Republican Jennifer Ruth Green are going head-to-head. Right now, New York Times is reporting with 22% of the votes counted. Democratic incumbent Frank Mervyn has 61%, and Republican Jennifer Ruth Green has 40%. And in Virginia, it's a tale of 2 incumbents running in the 2nd congressional district. Fox News is reporting with 56% of the votes counted. Democratic incumbent Elaine Luria has 44%, and Republican Jennifer Kiggins has 56%. I'll be back in the next half hour with new results and hopefully some projected winners.
Thanks for the information, Zabria. As we wait for more results, let's take a look at our candidates for Tennessee governor. Jason Martin is the Democratic nominee. Two of his missions are to be a voice for the working class and to equally represent Tennesseans. But what else is there to know about Jason Martin? Let's take a closer look.
To enjoy not only this moment, but this movement, you guys. We're going to make a difference in the state of Tennessee this year.
Dr. Jason Martin was born in southern Alabama to hardworking parents. His family was very involved with agriculture. Shucking corn, catching bream, or going to the watering hole was a common occurrence for Dr. Martin. He says working with his family instilled values in him that he upholds to this day.
Their sacrifices inspired me to become a critical care physician.
That hard work he put into everything helped him graduate from Tulane University in 1997. He began medical school in 1998 at the University of Southern Alabama. His next stop was Vanderbilt University for his residency and fellowship.
Stability and prosperity. I know the challenges of running a business, and I'm determined to create a thriving economy for business owners and employees.
During his fellowship, he built a reputation as an empathetic physician. He was asked to stay an additional year and led the residency program at the Nashville Veterans Affairs Center as the chief resident. Dr. Martin is married. He and his wife, Dr. Jennifer Martin, have 3 daughters.
I thank God for them every day. These strong women motivate me to work hard, to make Tennessee a state where we can all feel safe.
It was during his time at Nashville General he became aware that hardworking Tennessee families weren't being championed by their elected officials. According to Dr. Martin, this injustice motivated him to lead the fight for Tennessee's healthcare in our rural communities.
That is happening in Tennessee right now. Every day, people are making life and death decisions because of lack of access to healthcare, and this is happening while we're sitting on billions in a rainy day fund.
One of those fights included opposing Metro Nashville when they tried to close Nashville General. But the biggest fight had yet to happen. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Martin was one of the most prominent critics of Governor Bill Lee.
Governor Bill Lee continued to abandon Tennesseans, and he let us slide back.
He claims there was discrimination and questionable actions by our state government.
Lee put extremist ideology ahead of the people of Tennessee.
This outrage led to Dr. Martin throwing his hat in the ring for Tennessee governor.
I got into politics not to be a red or a blue chess piece, but because I care about my community. I've never done this before in my life. I saw staggering amounts of loss as an intensive care unit doctor in the areas where I work related to COVID, and knew that we could do better to take care of one another. And I want to take that same healing mentality, that same lifelong student mentality to government.
Coming up, we've got an exclusive interview with Dr. Martin, and we'll look into Governor Bill Lee's first term in office. Let's move now to the battle for the Senate. Republicans need just 1 seat to flip control of the Senate, but that's easier said than done. U.S. Senate anchor Colin Ewing is in Studio B with a look at tonight's big races.
Thanks, Brandon. Democrats currently have control over the Senate, but that all can change if the Republicans can pick up just 1 seat. Tonight, I'll be focused on races like Georgia, where Senator Raphael Warnock is going head-to-head with controversial Republican Herschel Walker. And in the red state of Florida, where Democrat Val Demings is challenging popular Senator Marco Rubio. All these races are crucial for who takes the Senate, so let's jump right in with some voting returns. In Kentucky, CNN is reporting with 41% of the votes counted that the winner is Republican Rand Paul, who has 54% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Charles Booker only has 46%. And also in Indiana, CNN is also reporting with 41% of the votes counted that the winner is Republican Todd Young, who has 62% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Thomas McDermott only has 35%. That's all the information I have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Jason Martin, who we got to see just a few minutes ago, is a Tennessee doctor running for governor. We saw a glimpse of exactly who he is as the Democratic nominee, but there's still so much to learn about him. I sat down with Jason Martin leading up to the election to dive deeper into the issues. Thank you for allowing me to interview you, Dr. Martin.
All right, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So our past few governors have had business backgrounds, but you have a medical background. How will that training translate to the governor's office if you win?
So I'm a critical care doctor. That means I work in the intensive care unit of hospitals, taking care of the sickest people in the building. And I know what it's like to work in a big system where you have to bring a lot of different people together to try to help individuals with life or death consequences. And I think those skills are directly translatable to government. I'm going to be working in a big system to try to help lots of people live better lives. And listen, government is not a business. Businesses are all about accumulating money for themselves and accumulating wealth. That's what our governor has done as governor of the state of Tennessee. I want to take the opportunity to use government to help people and to help everyone live better and safer lives.
So we know that one of the main reasons that you are running for governor is the state's response to the pandemic. Are there other reasons?
Sure, there are other reasons. So you're right about what brought me to the table. I work in Sumner County, a little 18-bed ICU up there doing critical care medicine. I had to say goodbye to more than 400 human beings during the COVID crisis. And I know we could have done better for them with an ounce of leadership from Governor Bill Lee and some truth-telling on his part. But look, this race is not about COVID, it's about leadership. And the lack of leadership is pervasive. We need leadership when it comes to public education. We need leadership when it comes to healthcare more broadly, like helping people get access to healthcare that doesn't break the bank. We need leadership when it comes to getting broadband internet and every zip code in this state, regardless of the color of your skin, how much money you make. We need criminal justice reform. We need leadership across the enterprise.
So if elected, what is the first issue you will address?
I think the very first issue we need to tackle is, well, it's hard to break it down, but I think healthcare is central to everything else. You got to have healthy people who can go out and work and provide for their families. And also, if you can help people get access to healthcare that doesn't break the bank, then you're creating an environment where businesses want to come to your community. But right there with healthcare is a great public education that stays public. We need to support our public teachers, public school teachers.
On education, you blast Governor Lee for starting the Education Savings Account program. He says that it gives families more options. What do you say?
So education savings accounts are also called voucher programs, and vouchers take money, public dollars, away from public schools and divert them to private schools. Now look, what does that leave the kids behind in the public schools? It leaves them with less resources, less money. I believe that if we want to provide great opportunities and great options for every child in this state, that means investing heavily in public schools, paying our teachers a salary commensurate with the work that they do, not firing teachers for teaching American history the way it happened, not having book burning parties and having our libraries edited because of a political ideology. We need to fully support our public schools, and I'm committed to making that happen as governor.
Well, Dr. Martin, financially, the state is in a good place with higher than predicted state revenue. How would you like to see that money be used?
Look, I don't want to disturb the business climate in the state of Tennessee. That is what generates our prosperity. But I think my difference with the governor is, what do we do with that prosperity that's been generated? While we're sitting on billions and billions and billions of your tax dollars and what they call a rainy day fund, we're 46th in the nation when it comes to funding our public schools per capita. I don't just want to beat Alabama in football. I want to beat them in public school funding. Let's do it together. I don't want to live in the state that is #1 in the nation when it comes to medical bankruptcies. We are breaking our families with medical debt. I don't want to live in a state that's #1 in the nation when it comes to hospital closures. We can do better by putting some of that money to work for people. We also have another big pile of money called the TANF funds. This is called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It's a pot of money that we could be using to take care of families in need in our communities. And I'm talking about food assistance, aftercare assistance, so that parents don't have to choose between a job and having a family. There's so much more we could do to take care of one another. And also, let's look at DCS. We got kids sleeping on the floor in Department of Children's Services offices. We've got, rape kits at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, 30, 40, 50 weeks behind processing, because the governor has underfunded those agencies. We got to take care of one another.
Well, Lee's campaign is focused heavily on the economy. Are there other issues his campaign is omitting?
Absolutely. The governor loves to show those ads of all the cranes, building, Tennessee, and he likes to talk about the billions of dollars he's accumulated. What he doesn't tell you is those cranes, they're only in Nashville. Right? The prosperity is only in Nashville. How do you get prosperity across the state? We believe in this campaign that Tennessee should be the land of opportunity for you, regardless of the color of your skin, how much money you have in the bank, regardless of your zip code, who you choose to love, or what your native tongue is. And to do that, you have to invest in people. You have to take that money and give people options, and that's public education, access to healthcare, great infrastructure. And also, I think we need to quit attacking marginalized communities in the state of Tennessee. Our governor has been all too willing to attack our populations of color, our immigrant communities, our LGBTQ plus neighbors, and I think we can do better to take care of one another. Common sense and compassion, that's all it's about.
Well, lastly, Dr. Martin, what would you like to say to voters?
Here's what I'd like to say to voters. We have an opportunity to change the tone here in the state of Tennessee. We have an opportunity to create a state that works for everyone. And to do that, we have to get out and vote. People are saying, now what are you doing running in this state as a Democrat when you know it's a deep red state? I don't believe it's a deep red state. I believe it's a non-voting state, and we can make a difference if we get out and let our voices be heard in the ballot box. There are a lot of people who benefit from chopping us up into groups. West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee, you know, white Tennesseans, black Tennesseans, brown Tennesseans, rich, poor, urban, rural. Don't take it. Don't take that bait. There's so much more that we have in common as opposed to that which divides us. That's the number one lesson I've learned after more than 50,000 miles up and down I-40, visiting all 95 counties in the state of Tennessee. Together, we can create a state that we can all be proud of. Just got to get out there and let our voices be heard at the ballot box.
Well, Dr. Martin, I really appreciated our conversation. Thank you so much.
I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here with you. Great job tonight, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee is coming off a very consequential first term. He led the state through the coronavirus pandemic and spearheaded major changes to education in Tennessee. Here's a look back at Governor Lee's first term.
Our American spirit is being tested, but in Tennessee, we're proof that America hasn't lost her way.
Like every elected leader across the country, the COVID pandemic defined Governor Lee's first term as governor. When the pandemic started, Governor Lee drew some backlash from conservatives for the state's economic shutdowns. Ultimately, he opposed a statewide mask mandate and defended those who refused to get the COVID vaccine.
Vaccines have been politicized by the Biden administration from the start, but for regular people, for Tennesseans, it's not about politics. It's about a paycheck. It's about a personal health decision of their own.
Lee worked proactively to lessen the burden on individuals facing unemployment due to COVID-19.
We know that people want to work, and we want to make that pathway for them.
He relaxed regulations to help Tennesseans get paid quicker through unemployment and set up new mechanisms to help Tennesseans find new or temporary employment. Governor Lee also worked to make sure that those who were self-employed had access to unemployment benefits during that time.
We have 250,000 jobs in the state that are unfilled.
During his first term, one of his key wins was rewriting how Tennessee funds public schools.
Any high-quality charter school operator that wants to locate in the state, we want them to.
Lee and his administration spearheaded an effort that attaches a set amount of money per student. While trying to pass his contentious school voucher law, Tennessee's Supreme Court ruled that it did not violate the state constitution. This was a big win for Lee because it was passed by the thinnest of margins.
I'm not so much an advocate of charter schools as I am of good schools.
The plan lets families in Nashville and Shelby County use taxpayer dollars on private school. Governor Bill Lee signed an executive order directing accountability measures for school safety and an evaluation of training for Tennessee law enforcement. The order also established additional resources to support parents, teachers, and law enforcement in improving school security practices.
We are hopeful that these additional dollars can be used to protect our students and our teachers.
Some lawmakers spiked or undermined some of the governor's top initiatives at the time, like the push to make Juneteenth a state holiday. Lee sought to squash serious opposition within the party by dealing with the GOP-dominated legislature, especially on social media. He pushed a strict anti-abortion ban, a permitless handguns carry law, and signed off on other socially conservative policies, including those targeting LGBTQ people.
We'll comment on bills that make it through committee, and what we're working on are the bills that are right before us today.
Notably, Lee was forced to drop his plan to offer paid family leave for the state workers after receiving a cool reception from Republican lawmakers.
We're taking a monumental step forward in celebrating, cherishing, and defending life.
We reached out to Governor Lee for an interview and got no response. Speaking of governors, there are 36 gubernatorial seats on the ballot in 2022. The results of this year's national election could lead to a number of firsts. Gubernatorial race anchor Maria Strickland is tracking these tense and staggering races.
This year's governor races are heating up with clear choices and ideas. The slate of candidates are not shy about doubling down on their beliefs and ideology. According to CNN, Democratic nominees for governors are facing the stiffest competition this year. Despite the 2018 blue wave this year, the Democratic Party is expected to pick up at least 2 governor seats in Massachusetts and Maryland. The Republican Party could flip a few states as well. Meanwhile, in Tennessee, if I were a betting person, I would say Governor Lee has a good chance of winning a second term. I'll be looking at this race and many more throughout the night. Let's get to some of those results. First up in Kansas, Fox News reports Laura Kelly to be the winner. This was a close one. Up next in Florida, CNN projects Ron DeSantis to be the winner, with 85% of the votes counted. Brandon, we're working to get more results from other states, and I'll have those soon.
Throughout the night, you'll hear one buzzword: redistricting. It happens every 10 years after the census is completed. Redistricting, while in the Constitution, has taken on a hyper-partisan stigma over the last century. I had a chance to speak with U of M political science professor David Matlock about issues surrounding this controversial practice. Thank you for coming on the show, Mr. Matlock.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So there is talk in both Republican and Democratic circles that the other party poses a threat to our democracy. Can you define what democracy means in our modern world?
Sure. Democracy simply means government by the people. Mm-hmm. Well, and government of the people, too. The problem we've had in America is this evolution of what the people means. Mm-hmm. So it's grown in time from being property owners to simply people who define themselves as white, to simply people who define themselves as African American, and then we add women into the mix. But we're constantly asking ourselves, right, mm-hmm. who are the people who can participate?
So what do you think are some threats to our democracy here?
Well, commonly held threats, at least mm-hmm. within the college arena, I think mm-hmm. you would see is that for democracy to work, people and political parties have to know how to lose. Mm-hmm. And they also have to understand that even though they do lose, that somewhere down the road they have a chance of winning again. Historically, what has occurred is when people don't feel they have a chance of winning mm-hmm. again, they resort to desperate measures. And what you've seen lately is very indicative of what's occurred all throughout America's history: desperate measures by people to try to hold on to power because they mm-hmm. don't think they can ever get power back again. Mm-hmm. Simply it.
Well, where do you think America, what are the steps we can take to reverse those desperate measures happening?
Well, we need to have the people who are saying and doing these things, mm-hmm. number one, to stop doing it and to believe in the system enough to know that, especially in recent history, they will get power back mm-hmm. at some point. Politics has changed a lot since 1972, mm-hmm. and what you've seen is there has been this back and forth of people getting power.
So what new voter laws were passed in Tennessee, and what do they mean for our voters?
Well, voting laws in Tennessee are pretty much indicative of what most southern states are doing, mm-hmm. which is they want to make sure, right, that people have IDs. And I think in Tennessee you have to have a picture ID. Mm-hmm. You have to have a place of residence. And of course you have to vote at the right place at the right time. What is happening in Tennessee and other states, especially in the South, is that people are being restricted in terms of when and where they can vote. Mm-hmm. And again, it's another sign of desperation by one party to say that we're not really sure we have enough voters to keep our party winning. Mm-hmm.
So after the 2020 election, lawmakers in mostly red states passed new laws that they said would make this election more secure. Can you explain to our viewers why these lawmakers felt they needed to pass these laws even though the 2020 election was the most secure to date?
Yes. Well, the foundation of all this is the Republican Party is not growing. Mm-hmm. And so when a party is not growing, you have to resort to other methods to make sure that you're winning. Because if you really look at the demographics of the party right now, mm-hmm. it's mostly white, male, rural, evangelical Christian. Mm-hmm. And so unless they change their message, or unless they lose a lot till they just hit rock bottom, you're going to keep seeing all of these measures that they're doing in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. All of these states are doing the same thing, right? They're restricting people's access to the ballot who they don't want to vote.
Do you believe that the Republican Party will change their message in the future?
I believe they'll change their message in the future, but only if they hit rock bottom and they don't have anywhere else to go. I mean, there are some points of optimism for the party in that I think more and more people who define themselves as Latino and Hispanic, that has been a growing part of the party. But again, the problem is young people are not really flocking to that party because they bought more into the diverse notion of the nation. So they're not going to be in a party that polarizes people. They actually want to be part of the majority of people. At least that's what the statistics are showing.
So, Mr. Matlock, one of the major changes this election cycle is the redistricting that happened after the 2020 census.
Yes.
Can you explain this process?
Sure. With every census, we try to make sure that there are a particular number of people who live in each district. Well, of course, people move, right? We have a very, very mobile society. And what happens with this mobility is some districts end up losing voters, as in some states lose voters, some states gain voters, which means some districts gain voters. So you have to redraw the lines every 10 years, the party in power. The problem with that is that if the party in power is redrawing district lines, they tend to do it to their advantage. And so there are two things you do. You draw the lines to where your group owns that district, or you redraw the lines to where you dilute the other party's power in that district. And so those things have tended to work since the last presidential election.
What effect does redistricting have on our political climate?
Well, it forces us, especially at the legal level, to figure out, right, what is a proper voting district. So if someone redraws the line that says, I want this district, just using it as an example, that used to be formerly mostly African American, now to be practically all white, right? Well, then that gets into legal issues, and the party that wants that doesn't mind taking those things to court. You've seen it right now in Alabama. It's a perfect example of what's going on.
So gerrymandering has become a huge issue in our country.
Yes.
Can you explain some of the implications gerrymandering has on voter turnout?
Well, it in many ways it discourages voter turnout if you automatically know that no matter how you vote, your vote is going to be diluted and diminished. And again, most of the time gerrymandering occurs along, for lack of better terms, racial lines. They try to disguise it as being socioeconomic lines, but for the most part, it's along racial lines.
Well, Mr. Matlock, this was such an informative discussion. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
That was such an eye-opening conversation. We'll have more informative interviews like this one later in the show. The reason someone votes varies from person to person. Perhaps they're an issues voter or a candidate voter. GHS-TV reporter Delta Buchanan and videographer Jeremiah Davis went to a polling location and asked voters about the issues important to them this election.
I'm at a polling location in Germantown. Everyone I've talked to has their own reasons for voting, but they are all hopeful their candidate will win.
Well, it's our constitutional right and duty to vote as citizens and so that we have a say in what goes on in our government.
Because that gives me the right to express my voice. Not all the countries will have, the luxury of having democracy, true democracy, where you can exercise your vote and do what the majority of the population would like to do.
I am from France. I have been here in the US for 24 years now. I never miss any vote because I think it's very important to decide the future of your kids.
I was glad to bring them because it's important for them to see what it's like to go vote and to just model that democracy for them at work.
Used to, I didn't think it was important to vote because I didn't see much of a difference between. I wasn't really paying attention. And now I think that there's a pretty big difference between, politically speaking, just between the candidates. And so it feels like my vote counts a little more than it had previously. So that's really why I'm out here.
Well, that's the only way we can have our voices heard these days. We have, I don't have the kind of money of a large corporation, and so the way that I can hold my politicians accountable is by showing up at the polls and letting them know what kind of platform that I believe in.
The important issues are the economy, a secure border. Those are the biggest ones for me. Economy includes the price of gas, price of groceries, inflation, all that stuff.
The choices that we're given, they don't always align perfectly with what we believe. So we just have to choose the best set of issues that are out there. I think what can be really tough in America, because we're so polarized, is that whatever you believe may not fall neatly into the choices that you're given. So you just have to choose the best platform that matches closest with what you hope to see in the future.
There's a lot of enthusiasm this year.
We're seeing a lot of changes in the economy. We're seeing a lot of changes that are hitting us directly. And so, when things are particularly when things are going, like the economy is suffering, you're going to have a lot more people paying attention and wanting to come out and make a change.
I just think it's important that everybody come out and cast their vote.
So, there you have it. It will be an exciting night to say the least. Reporting for Election Night 2022, I'm Delta Buchanan.
Thanks, Delta. We've got a big night planned here at GHS-TV. More interviews are headed your way. Plus, we'll check back in with our anchors for the latest results from tonight's exciting races. But right now, we're going to take a short break. GHS-TV's live coverage of Election Night 2022 will be right back.
Camera one, switch audio, cue talent.
So GHS-TV was started in 1982 by Frank Bluestein, the department's founder.
It's a multi-million-dollar television studio, and students who are a part of it have the opportunity to do real-world work.
Welcome to GHS Insider, the show. What makes this program unique is the students here. We come with a lot of potential and a lot of talent, and we also come with the mindset of we have to do this, we can do this.
In this class, we really have the ability to be as creative as we want to be.
On the show today, we take you to the side. When you see yourself on a screen, it's a feeling where it's like, I actually contributed to something, I actually did something that matters to people.
We have fun days, like when we do shows and we do a really good show, it's that adrenaline of like, oh wow, we just did a really good show, we did it. Hey everyone, I'm Brooklyn White.
And there's a real sense of pride that comes from completing a show that you have written, produced, thought of on your own. And that sense of pride is really important, and it keeps us motivated because we want to do more. We want to experience that feeling again.
We're always pushing the kids. We're always challenging them, and they rise to the challenge.
So the program has absolutely changed a lot for me. It has given me a view into the arts and has let me see that I really do enjoy working behind the camera as well as in front of the camera.
The future of our program really, a lot of times, is up to the students. It's their willingness to see beyond what is here and what it can be. Year to year, it changes with the students, but the ability of the students never changes.
Go Red Devils!
For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to GHS-TV's coverage of the 2022 election. I'm your moderator, Brandon Sewell. The results are really starting to come in. So let's turn to our local and state races anchor, Tia Lyons, who is tracking the night's big races.
Yes, Brandon, we have a lot of new state results in, so let's get right into it, starting off with State Senate District 31. Ruby Powell Dennis is leading with 68% of the votes, while Brent Taylor has 32% of the votes. And this seat is an open race because incumbent Brian Kelsey is not running for re-election due to his campaign finance violation charges. Moving on to State Senate District 33, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 22 precincts counted. Frederick Tappan is taking a huge lead with 82% of the votes. London Lamar has 17% of those votes, and Justina Robinson has 1% of those votes. While this is a heavily Democratic district, Tappan is well funded, which might contribute to his votes. Moving on to Amendment number 3, which removes slavery as a punishment for crime. Tennessean is reporting with 16% of the votes counted. Yes is winning with 78% of the votes, and no has 22% of those votes. This amendment will remove language from the state constitution that allows the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishment. But it does not prohibit an inmate from working when an inmate has been convicted of a crime. Moving on to our next race. For State House District 86, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 19% of the votes counted. Barbara L. Cooper is winning with 75% of the votes, while Michael Porter has 25% of the votes. State House 95 is reporting, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 19% of the votes counted. Patricia Cossey has 76% of those votes, while Kevin Vaughn has 24% of the votes. That's all the results I have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
I want to touch back on that amendment, Tia. I can't believe that slavery is still on the books. And it's my understanding that we're not the only state.
Yes, we're actually one of 5 states who are voting to remove slavery language from the state constitution. Even though slavery was abolished more than 150 years ago, nearly 20 states still allow forced labor as punishment. Voters in Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, and Vermont are also deciding whether to close their loopholes. The amendments are part of a national protest to the exception clause of the 13th Amendment that allows slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime.
Thank you, Tia. Let's go now to Washington, where people are wondering if Republicans have enough momentum to chip away at the Democrats' slim majority. Xavier McClain has an update on the battle for the House.
Thank you, Brandon. Let's just jump straight into it. First up, we have North Carolina's 13th Congressional District. CNN is reporting with 65% of the votes counted. Democrat Wiley Nickel has 55%, and Republican Bo Hines has 45%. Now, the race for the 13th district is the most competitive in North Carolina and was redrawn this year by accord. Hines is a 26-year-old political newcomer who is endorsed by former President Trump. Nickel is a 2-term Democratic state senator. Latest polls show Nickel is up by 1 point. Resilience in otherwise unfavorable territory. Moving on to Illinois' 17th Congressional District, CNN is reporting with 0% of the votes counted. Now, this is another open seat. Sorensen has been a TB meteorologist for 20 years. Esther Joy King ran for House Representative in 2020, but lost to the current representative, Sherry Bustos. This district was redrawn and now has a more Democratic partisan lean than the old district, according to the Cook Political Report and 538. That's all we have for now. Thank you, Brandon. Back to you.
The race for the Senate is also tightening. Republicans need to flip just 1 seat to take control. Senate anchor Colin Ewing is following tonight's close races.
Thank you, Brandon. We have a lot of races, so let's get right into it. First, in Florida, CNN is reporting with 87% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Marco Rubio, who has 57% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Val Demings only has 42%. Now, Marco Rubio is running for his 3rd term, and has enjoyed solid support from Hispanic and Latino voters. Meanwhile, Val Demings is a member of the U.S. House and was a manager in Donald Trump's first impeachment trial. Now, moving on to Georgia, CNN is reporting with 66% of the votes counted that Democrat Raphael Warnock has 51% of the votes. Meanwhile, Republican Herschel Walker only has 47%. Now, Warnock won a special election in 2020 by 0.2 percentage points and is now running for a full term. However, Walker has been bruised on the campaign trail over allegations he paid for at least 2 abortions. Now, moving on to Pennsylvania, Fox News is reporting with 17% of the votes counted that Democrat John Fetterman has 60% of the votes. Meanwhile, Mehmet Oz only has 37%. Now, this is an open seat that was previously held by a Republican. Fetterman was seen as one of the party's strongest candidates, but a stroke that left him with an auditory processing disorder has shaken things up. Celebrity TV Dr. Oz Mehmet has seized on Fetterman's situation, attacking his health and saying he may not be up for the job. Now, moving on to South Carolina, Fox News is reporting with 38% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Republican Tim Scott, who has 62% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Crystal Matthews has 38%. Moving on to Oklahoma, CNN is reporting with 59% of the votes counted that the projected winner is James Lankford, who has 66% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Madison Horn only has 31%. I'll have another update shortly, but right now, let's bring in Maria Strickland, who has had the latest updates on the gubernatorial races.
Thanks, Colin. We have a lot of races, so let's get right into it. First up north in Maine, Fox News projects Janet Mills to be the winner with 11% of votes counted. Mills is running for a second term. She says she's worked across the aisle to deliver progress as governor. Paul LePage, who is her opponent, is a former Maine governor and is running for a third non-consecutive term. LePage has not only made false claims about voter fraud in 2020, but has a history of alleging stolen elections. Mills is favored in this race. Up next in Georgia, CNN, there is no current projected winner, but with 66% of the votes counted, Brian Kemp is in the lead with 51.7% votes. Kemp and Abrams face each other in the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election. Kemp defeated Abrams by 1 percentage point. Abrams may be facing a tougher fight this time around. New voter restriction laws that were put in place after 2020 could hinder Democratic voter turnout. Kemp is favored to win. Next up in Pennsylvania, there's also no current projected winner, but Josh Shapiro is in the lead with 64.82% of votes in. Josh Shapiro is the state attorney general. He waged a number of legal fights against the Trump administration. His opponent, Mastriano, is a vocal supporter of efforts to overturn former President Donald Trump's 2020 defeat in the state, and he still calls for broad changes to the state's election law. Shapiro has constantly led in the polls this whole election cycle. Next up in Ohio, Fox News projects Mike DeWine to win, with 42% of the votes counted. Up next in Tennessee, CNN projects Bill Lee to be the winner, with 36% of the votes counted. That's all the results we have for it right now. Back to you, Brandon.
In August, Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris was reelected with more than 55% of the vote. I spoke with him shortly after his win to find out what he wants to accomplish during his second term. So thank you for coming on the show, Mayor Harris. So you won re-election against a pretty tough Republican opponent. What did you learn the second time around?
So I did just win an election, thankfully, and now in my second term. So the election was August the 4th. We've been in the second term for the last 5 or 6 weeks now. It was a tough race. I think I've learned in this race what I've learned in all my races is you really have to take a positive program to the community and keep your fingers crossed, and that's what we did. We talked a lot about how to advance Memphis and Shelby County, how to lift more people out of poverty, and how to create more opportunity across our community. And we're fortunate enough, blessed enough that it worked and got more voters than the other guy. He really put forth a very spirited effort, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from him in the future.
So what are your top priorities as mayor as you start your second term?
So it's a great question. So one of the things that I'm really focused on is making sure that there's more access to health care throughout our community. We have a lot of neighborhoods in Memphis and Shelby County where too many residents don't have access to a primary care provider, and so their conditions, health conditions that is, worsen, and they end up in emergency rooms, and in too many cases, they die. And so one of the ways we can turn some of that around is to make sure that more people have access to primary care providers, and so we're going to be doing that. We call that program Shelby Cares. Another thing we're going to be working on is making sure that we create more opportunity for youth and young adults in Memphis and Shelby County. So we are already laser focused on youth who get in trouble and need some supports, and I'm happy to talk about that. But we're trying to make sure we also think about the youth who never get in trouble, but are looking for ways to enjoy this community and all that it has to offer and live up to their potential. So a lot of that is, making our museums and other cultural assets free to youth and to families. A lot of that is making sure we integrate youth voice in some of our decision-making apparatus here in Memphis and Shelby County. So we've created the Shelby County Youth Council. So a lot of those issues around activating our youth and creating more opportunity for youth are really top of my mind, in addition to healthcare access and a whole host of other things we've worked on over the course of my last 4 years.
So 4 years ago, you had a transition team that helped you develop policies and programs. You just appointed a similar committee. Who are the type of people on it, and what is their mission?
So that's a great issue as well, because what we really tried to reflect in terms of the transition team that we put together 4 years ago and this time around is the breadth of diversity in Memphis and Shelby County. And diversity for us around here means diversity of perspectives. So we want both young and young at heart. We want, wealthy and hopeful. We want black and white. We want Jew and Gentile. We want the breadth of the diversity that we know is out there in Memphis and Shelby County. And so those are the kinds of individuals that you see on the transition team right now. They're deliberating. They're broken up into 4 or 5 different subcommittees where they are focused on a particular issue like health care or criminal justice reform and what have you. And they're going to deliver their recommendation in the next few weeks, and I'm looking forward to it because we'll activate on those recommendations, and it'll really drive the agenda for the next 4 years.
So one of the policies that came from that transition group was the first investment in pre-K education. So what are your goals for education during your second term?
So what we've learned is that you have got to get in there early if you're going to do something to turn around some of the indicators that are not going in the right direction in Memphis and Shelby County. One of the things that is worrisome to lots of different stakeholder groups is our literacy rates. They're just not high enough. And one of the ways we can do something about that is, as you mentioned, an investment in early childhood education like pre-K. And so since I've been in office, Shelby County has invested, over $8 million a year in early childhood education. And we're going to continue that massive commitment to early childhood education, working with the city, Memphis Shelby County school system, and other partners to make sure that every family, regardless of their financial wherewithal, has the ability to enjoy a high-quality pre-K education. So we're working real hard on that. It was a recommendation from our last transition committee, and we're going to double down on that investment over the next 4 years.
So in a previous interview with DA Steve Mulroy, he briefly discussed reforming the justice system. How will the two of you work together to accomplish his goal?
So criminal justice reform is a really important area here in Memphis and Shelby County because we're not going to have public safety as long as we take a bumper sticker approach to public safety. If we're going to have real public safety, we've got to realize that we've got to be able to improve on a lot of different kinds of categories. So that includes reentry, making sure that those with a criminal history are reintegrated back in our community in a meaningful way and are able to get jobs and so forth. That's part of public safety. It also means investment in youth, making sure that our youth have meaningful opportunity to succeed such that they don't turn to trouble in the first place. That means you've got to have leadership opportunities for them, development opportunities for them, and recreational opportunities for them that are all accessible. So working on the youth on the one hand, working on those who are reentering our community after serving a stint in prison on the other hand are also part of public safety. It's not just the arrest and prosecution. And so DA Morrow and I and a bunch of other stakeholders have been talking about how do we make sure we recognize the complexity of public safety as an issue, and how do we make sure we have programs that respond to each level of that complexity.
So, as mayor, you've also passed many justice reforms, such as Ban the Box. What is that, and what has been the result?
So Ban the Box has been an extraordinary initiative that really has had incredible results here in our community. What it does is when we go around about our business of hiring new employees in Shelby County government, it means that we will not make a pile of resumes that include people with a criminal history and another pile of people that don't have a criminal history, because we know how that turns out. No one reviews the pile of resumes of those individuals with a criminal history. And so that means that those people are precluded from getting various opportunities. And guess what? If they don't get meaningful employment, they might also turn back to a life of crime. So Ban the Box does just that. That means that we will eliminate the part of our application process that asks you whether you have a criminal history. So there won't be those two stacks of resumes. It will just be one stack of resume, and no one has to report at the application part of the process whether they have a criminal history. So that means you open up the door to more people with a criminal history getting past that application part of the process and probably into the door for jobs. So we've got over 50 jobs that we hire for every single month in Shelby County government, and so it creates a lot more opportunity for those with a criminal history.
Well, I really enjoyed our conversation, Mr. Harris. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. I really appreciate talking to you.
It's time to get another check of the races. We begin with Tia Lyons, who is following the state and local races.
I have plenty of new local races for you guys, starting off in Lakeland. The Lakeland Commissioner vote. Shelby Vote is reporting with 4 precincts counted. Michael Dow has 49% of the votes, while Connie McCarter is leading with 51% of the votes. It's a close race, but this race is vote for 2, so both people will be on the commission. Moving on to Lakeland School Board, Shelby Vote is reporting with 4 precincts counted. Keith Acton is leading with 34% of the votes. Laura Harrison and Deborah Thomas are tied with 33% of the votes. This, like the commission, is a vote for 3 people, so all 3 people will be on the school board. Moving on to the Lakeland mayor, Shelby Vote is reporting with 4 precincts counted, but Josh Rahman will be the winner because he is unopposed, since he was the only candidate to successfully turn in a petition to secure his position for the mayor on the November ballot. Moving on to Millington Alderman position 3, Shelby Vote is reporting with 2 precincts counted. Chris Ford has 74% of the votes, while Thomas Stevenson has 26%. On the Millington School Board, position 3, Shelby Vote is reporting with 2 precincts counted. Brian McGovern has 56% of the votes, while Gregory Ritter has 44% of the votes. For Millington School Board position 6, Shelby Vote is reporting with 2 precincts counted. Mandy Compton has 50% of the votes, and Larry Jackson has 50% of the votes. They are separated by just 9 votes. That was a look at some of the local races. Let's send things back to Washington, where Democrats are trying to fend off a Republican wave in the House. Here's Zabria McClain.
Thank you, Tia. Let's get right into it. So first up, we have Colorado's 8th Congressional District. ABC News is reporting with 54% of the votes counted. Democrat Yadira Caraveo has 49%, and Republican Barbara Kirkmeyer has 47%. Now, this is a new district in Colorado thanks to redistricting, the first one since 2001. Demographically, the 8th District has the state's largest percentage of Hispanic or Latino residents. Caraveo is a member of the state House. She is a first-generation Mexican-American. Kirkmeyer is a state senator. She was first elected in 2020. Next up, we have Maine's 2nd Congressional District. CNN is reporting with 16% of the votes counted. Democratic incumbent Jared Golden has 48%, and Republican Bruce Poliquin has 45%. This year's race is a rematch from 2018. Poliquin was the incumbent then, but Golden won by a razor-thin margin. Golden is a moderate Democrat. Poliquin was a moderate Republican while in office, but has since embraced Trump-style politics. Next up, we have Michigan's 7th Congressional District. New York Times is reporting with 24% of the votes counted. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin has 42%, and Republican Tom Barrett has 57%. Now, Slotkin was first elected to the seat in 2018 and won re-election in 2020 in a district that voted for Trump. Republican Representative Liz Cheney, a staunch critic of former President Donald Trump, endorsed Slotkin just last week, her first ever endorsement of a Democrat. Barrett is a state senator and former state representative. He served in the U.S. Army. That's all that we have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks for that update, Zabria. While we have you, I'd like to talk about the impact of the Latinx vote in states like Texas and Nevada. The majority vote Democrat, but I read that the GOP has done a lot over the past few election cycles to appeal to this group. What are your thoughts?
Well, Brandon, I would say it's complicated. Latinx voters are the second largest minority voting group, so they will play a decisive role in who will control Congress. From the research I've come across, economy, healthcare, and violent crime are their top issues. Notice that I didn't say immigration, which is what you would think. They say Republicans can better handle inflation, jobs, and the economy, while they trust Democrats to handle things like crime, healthcare, and abortion. So I'll be curious to see where the votes fall at the end of the night.
Thanks, Zabria. The race for the Senate is nowhere near being over. Colin Ewing is in the studio with an update.
Thank you, Brandon. Right now, in North Carolina, CNN is reporting with 78% of the votes counted that Republican Ted Budd is up by only 3% with 51% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Cherry Beasley has 48%. Now, Ted Budd is a member of the U.S. House, and he's a self-described conservative warrior. He was among the Republicans who challenged the certification of the 2020 election results. And Cherry Beasley is a former North Carolina Supreme Court justice member. Moving on to Ohio, Fox News is reporting with 55% of the votes counted that J.D. Vance is up 6% with 53% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Tim Ryan is only has 47% of the votes. Now, Tim Ryan is a moderate who has made his campaign about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the state. Meanwhile, Vance is the author of the best-selling memoir Hillbilly Eulogy and endorsed by President Trump. Moving on to Wisconsin, ABC News is reporting with 25% of the votes counted that Mandela Barnes is also up 6% with 53% of the votes. Meanwhile, Ron Johnson only has 47% of the votes. Now, Ron Johnson is viewed as the most endangered Republican. Johnson's previous support of Trump's attempt to overturn the election and opposition to the COVID-19 vaccine are positions that could hurt him with swing voters. Moving on to Connecticut, Fox News is reporting with 18% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Richard Blumenthal, who has 56% of the votes. Meanwhile, Laura Louie has 44%. Now on to Arkansas. Fox News is reporting with 36% of the votes counted that the projected winner is John Boozman, who has 58% of the votes, while Natalie James only has 34%. More results are coming in for the gubernatorial races. Maria Strickland joins me in the studio with a breakdown.
Thanks, Colin. First up in Massachusetts, Fox News reports no projected winner, but Maura Healey is winning. She has 59.25 votes, while her opponent, Geoff Diehl, only has 39.15 votes. Maura Healey is the state attorney general. She lifted her profile by repeatedly suing former President Trump's administration. If elected, she would be the state's first openly gay female governor. Diehl has close ties to Trump and embraced Trump's false claims that he won the 2020 election. According to polls, Healey is expected to win tonight. Next up in Michigan, again, no projected winner, but Gretchen Whitmer is winning by only a little. Gretchen Whitmer has 51.9% votes, while her opponent has 46.57 votes. Whitmer is hoping for a second term. Whitmer was the subject of an attempted kidnapping by anti-mask/Trump supporters. Dixon was endorsed by Trump and has promoted election conspiracy theories. In 2020, Michigan was one of the 5 states that voted for Biden after voting for Trump in 2016. Whitmer has had a consistent lead in the polls. Up next, in New Hampshire, Fox News reports no projected winner. New Hampshire governors are elected for 2 terms. Chris Sununu is running for his 4th term. He often finds himself ranked near the top of most popular governors lists. Instituted targeted student loan for relief for those in healthcare, biotechnology, and social work. Sherman has not run for office before. He wants to fight for lower costs for granted staters. In Idaho, there is no projected winner. Next up in Oklahoma, there is also no projected winner. That's all the results I have for right now. Back to you, Brandon. Thanks for the update, Maria. What a night it has been so far. We'll have another round of updates and more interviews with politicians and candidates when Election Night 2022 returns. Please stay with us.
"45 years ago, the Poplar Pike Playhouse came into existence under the direction of Frank Bluestein. And over the years, his reputation and the reputation of the program grew. And so students from the community just clamored to be a part of this program.
God bless us, everyone.
A student comes into Germantown High School that's interested in theater, they're going to start an introduction to theater. You get a great overview of what theater is. And then, if you want to continue in our program, then you have a choice of taking 2 other classes. You can take either acting or tech theater. That is very hands-on, and the students will learn a lot about set building, lighting design, sound design.
Something that's very unique about PPP is that the students do everything here. We do the lights, we do the set, we do the acting, we do the dancing. Everything you see backstage and on stage, a student is doing it. It is completely student ran.
The Poplar Pike Playhouse has definitely still grown my love for theater.
We want to do great work, and we really want this to be an experience for students that they will hold on to for the rest of their lives, and that they will take the things that they learned into their lives and help shape them into really productive citizens.
Everybody, cut loose! For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775.
You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to Election Night 2022. I'm your moderator, Brandon Sewell. We've had an exciting evening filled with results, and the rest of the night promises to be just as eventful. New results are pouring in every minute. Our local and state races anchor, Tia Lyons, is tracking the area's most important races. She's here now with an update.
This amendment will remove the ban of clergy members serving in public office. The Supreme Court ruled in 1978 that forbidding clergy to serve was unconstitutional. However, the language has remained in the Tennessee Constitution. It looks like 65% of people want this to pass, while 35% of people are saying no. Moving on to the Germantown Alderman position 1. Scott Sanders is the incumbent for this race, and he has 67% of the votes, while Core has 33% of the votes. Moving on to our next race. Germantown School Board position 2. Chapman is leading with 68% of the votes, while Chipman has 31% of those votes. Moving on to our next race. For Germantown School Board position 4, Griffith has 54% of those votes, while Schween has 46% of those votes. Moving on to our next race for Municipal Judge Division 2. This is our most contested race yet. While Branham has 8% of the votes, Burrow has 13% of the votes, Cameron has 16% of the votes, Cooper has 22% of the votes, Hall Lewis has only 8% of those votes, Ingram has 9% of those votes, Larsha has 5% of those votes, Stevens has 3% of those votes, and Watkins has 17% of those votes. Moving on to our next race. For Memphis City Council District 4, Sweargan Washington is leading with 56% of those votes. Blankenship has 24% of those votes. Ford has 13% of those votes, and Jackson has 7% of those votes. I'll be back shortly with more results. But first, the race for the control of the House is tightening. Zaire McClain is here with more results.
Thank you, Tia. Let's get right into it. First up, we have Kansas's 3rd Congressional District. CNN is reporting with 63% of the votes counted. Democratic incumbent Sharice Davids has 57%, and Republican Amanda Atkins has 41%. Now, the race is a rematch of the 2020 general election when Davids defeated Atkins by 10 points. Davids was first elected in 2018 and one of the first 2 Native American women to be elected in Congress. Atkins is a former chairwoman of the Kansas Republican Party. Davids is one of many Democrats who saw her seat become less friendly after redistricting. Moving on, we have Ohio's 13th Congressional District. New York Times is reporting with 37% of the votes counted. Democrat Amelia Sykes has 61%, and Republican Madison Gesiotto Gilbert has 39%. Now, Sykes is a member of the Ohio State House. She was first elected in 2014. Gilbert worked on both of Donald Trump's presidential campaigns. Sykes wants to focus on the economy, women's health care, and voting rights, while Gilbert wants to lower taxes and investigate voter fraud. While a Democrat currently holds this seat, the newly drawn district now leans slightly red, which is why Gilbert is favored to win the seat. Now, next up, we have Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District. Fox News is reporting with 12% of the votes counted. Democrat Brad Pfaff has 47%, and Republican Derek Van Orden has 53%. Now, Brad Pfaff is currently a member of the Wisconsin State House, representing District 32. And that's all the information that we have for right now. We'll be back with more results. Back to you, Brandon.
In the Senate, the fight for control hangs in precarious balance. Let's check back in with Colin Ewing to see where the race stands.
Thank you, Brandon. In New Hampshire, Fox News is reporting with 24% of the votes counted that right now Mackey Hassan has 57% of the votes. Meanwhile, Donald Bolduc only has 42%. Now, Maggie Hassan is hoping for a second term. She is the former governor of the state, and she has made the defense of abortion rights a centerpiece of her campaign. Meanwhile, Don Bolduc is a retired brigadier general and a MAGA Republican. Now, moving on to Arizona, CNN, we currently don't have results for Arizona, but trust me, we are working to get those to you because it's a really interesting race. And pardon me. Mark Kelly is a former NASA astronaut who was elected in 2020 and in a special election, so right now he's running for a full term. He is another vulnerable senator who presents himself as a moderate, bucking Biden and his party on a number of occasions. Now, on to Colorado. Fox News is reporting with 47% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Michael Bennet, who has 58% of the votes. Meanwhile, Republican Joe O'Dea only has 40%. Now, on to Idaho. Currently, we do not have a vote in, but trust me, we are working hard to make sure we have these votes, to make sure we have these results in for all of you. Now, moving on to Kansas. ABC News is reporting with 35% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Jerry Moran, who has 55% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Mark Holland only has 42%. Now, on to Missouri. Fox News is reporting with 21% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Republican Eric Schmidt, who has 58% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Trudy Bush Valentine only has 40%. That's all the results I have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Hey, Colin, real quick. So campaign spending was supposed to reach record highs this election cycle. What have you seen in some of your races?
Well, Brandon, in states like Arizona and New Hampshire, spending for both parties started off strong. But in the weeks leading up to tonight, I discovered GOP super PACs actually pulled away fundings from those states. The easiest explanation is that they looked at the poll numbers and didn't think their candidates could overcome their deficit. It's the opposite in Colorado, where spending went up more than 200% between Labor Day and election night. Both parties thought they had good chances to win the seat, and it looks like the Republicans were right. Brandon?
Thank you, Colin. Now, let's send it over to Maria Strickland, who is following the gubernatorial races. Hey, Maria.
Hey, Brandon. We currently don't have any results as of right now, but I do have some background information on them. First up in Minnesota, Tim Walz was first elected in 2018. Walz says his administration built a strong economy in his first term. Scott Jensen was part of the State House until 2021. Average of polls has Walz leading by 9 points. Next up, in Wisconsin, Tony Evers was first elected in 2018 when he beat then incumbent Governor Scott Walker. Tim Michels has never run for office before. Instead of taking a more moderate approach, he has stayed to the right on issues of abortion, gun rights, and lent his support election deniers down the ballot in the state. The state has been described as an evenly split between Republicans and Democrats. Trump won the state in 2016. Biden won it in 2020. Lastly, in Maryland, Dan Cox is a member of State House. He is an election denier who arranged buses to take people to the January 6th rally that led to the insurrection at the Capitol building. Wesley Moore is a best-selling author. If elected, Moore will be the first African-American governor of Maryland. All polls heading in tonight have Moore winning by a landslide. That's all the results we have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
In 2020, more than 50% of young voters ages 18 to 29 placed the ballot. That's an 11-point increase over 2016. This year, more than 8 million Americans are newly eligible to vote. GHS-TV reporter Maya Logan and videographer Nate Nelson explored the barriers that may prevent young voter turnout.
If you don't participate in the vote and then the election doesn't go your way, you can't complain about the outcome.
I believe that this next generation is going to be the decision makers for where we go forward.
Gen Z are some of the most outspoken and politically involved people in America.
If you don't have the time or the money to go get an ID or whatever, you can't vote.
ID laws impact.
However, voting doesn't seem to be on the priority list.
At first, I wasn't going to vote simply because I didn't think it would impact me or my voice mattered.
Lack of election education is just one of the many reasons young people are hesitant to vote.
We had people come out to the school to talk to us about voting, but they only took the kids that were 18 or about to turn 18 before November.
They work, they pay taxes. Should they be allowed to vote? I believe that young people would be more engaged in being a part of the process when they see how certain political decisions impact their daily lives. Let's talk about voting and how we got here.
Here at GHS, the U.S. government class includes lectures on voting.
I am making a point to really focus in on what's happening around here locally. We are in a perfect scenario right now to get our Germantown students involved in the local decisions, especially when it comes to how, the future of Germantown High School.
Germantown had no plans on selling the school. Whether they want to lease it or not, it's another question, but they had no plans of selling the school.
The question is, could a special school district essentially reach over that line and take over that school? And the answer is no.
However, most students don't take the class until their senior year. That's part of the problem, according to Trinity.
Stop waiting till 18 to encourage people to vote. Stop waiting to educate us at 18. Start in 9th grade, since we are in high school and an election year could come up while we're in school.
If you have not casted your vote and you are registered, Up to Vote 901 and all of our community partners encourage you to get out and vote today.
Up to Vote 901 is a nonpartisan organization pushing to increase representation and voter turnouts in Memphis and Shelby County.
We've tried to make sure that people aren't just registered to vote, but adequately educated, engaged, informed, and empowered to turn out.
But Fisher says the biggest barrier is voter registration.
The day you turn 18, you should automatically be able to walk directly to the nearest voting booth and participate in the election.
Thanks to the efforts of organizations like Up the Vote 901 and government teachers across America, there are signs that young voters are coming around.
Your vote may not change an entire election, but you can change your perspective on voting.
And you need to understand what is important to you, what values are important to you, and what you want to see for the world for your children.
Reporting for GHS-TV, I'm Maya Logan.
Steve Mulroy stunned Amy Wyrick when he beat the incumbent for Shelby County District Attorney, and he's wasted no time in implementing changes to the office. I spoke with him recently about how he plans to affect change to our county justice system. So thank you for allowing me to interview you, Mr. Mulroy. So you had a decisive win over Amy Wyrick in August to win the district attorney's job. Why did you run to be DA?
Well, I was recruited, actually, Brandon, by a number of people who were concerned about the need for criminal justice reform in our system, which is a view that I share. You know, we'd had rising violent crime for over a decade, and the solution of the system seemed to always be mass incarceration focused. Lock more people up, lock them up for longer, but it hadn't been working. And a lot of us in Shelby County think that we needed new direction, something different. Focusing on violent crime, certainly, but also looking for alternatives to traditional incarceration for nonviolent crime, and just basically reforming the system. And so they convinced me that it was you know, a good idea for me to run, and here I am.
So what changes can we expect in Shelby County?
Well, for one thing, refocusing on violent crime, de-emphasizing things like marijuana possession and being laid on fines and fees, and focusing more on violent offenses. Second, more of a focus on alternatives to incarceration. So, for example, there's a program that Youth Villages here in Memphis has called Memphis Allies, where they reach out to people who are suspected of being repeat violent offenders, and they bring them in and they provide them, you know, job training and counseling if they need it, and housing assistance. And by the end of the program, they have an actual alternative to life on the street, which is the only life they've known. And the idea is that that will reduce the repeat offender rate long term. But also just generally reforming the system. A big focus on reducing the racial disparities that we see at every stage of the criminal justice system. Getting rid of the racial discrimination that's sort of baked into our system. Making sure that we don't have wrongful convictions. And in doing all of this, my hope is that we can restore public confidence in the fairness of the system, which right now we don't have. And with that restored public confidence, the community will cooperate with law enforcement more than it has in recent years. And that means providing tips, reporting crimes, serving as witnesses. And it's that kind of community cooperation with law enforcement that is really the most important thing if we're going to bend the curve on violent crime in Shelby County.
Mr. Mulroy, I read that there is a backlog of Shelby County cases. What is your plan to address this issue?
A large part of that backlog is going to be within the control of the judges. And I can't tell the judges what to do. But there are some things that my office can do. For one thing, I am going to give the individual assistant district attorneys, the individual prosecutors, more discretion to settle cases. And with a higher rate of settlement, that may help with the backlog. Another thing is that there are ways to reorganize the office in such a way that cases get not just bunched up in a couple of courts, but get more evenly distributed among many courts. And I think that will help to address the backlog as well. At the end of the day, though, you know, it's going to take the cooperation of the judges themselves to address the backlog.
So in October, you and juvenile court judge Tarek Sugarman asked the state to back an experimental sentencing program. Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, it's called blended sentencing, and here's the idea. Right now in our juvenile court system, we have two extreme options. If it's a relatively serious offense by a youthful offender, we can either transfer them off to adult prison, where the data shows they're actually more likely to reoffend when they come out. We're basically sending them off to crime college, teaching them how to be hardened criminals, which is not making us safer. That's one approach. Or we keep them in the juvenile court system where there's a broader array of rehabilitative services. However, what if that offender is 16 or 17? Well, under the law, we lose jurisdiction at age 19. So sometimes having them in the juvenile system for just a year or two isn't enough to rehabilitate them, and also doesn't really satisfy our sense of what is just given the seriousness of the offense. So it's either too little or too much. Blended sentencing is a middle ground approach. It gives the juvenile court judge discretion on a case-by-case basis, based on the facts and the circumstances, to say, well, we are going to keep this person in the juvenile system, but we're going to keep them there past the age of 19, as high as 21, in my view, preferably all the way up to age 25. And the reason we choose age 25 is that, and this will be of particular interest to your viewers, the brain science is conclusive here, that teenagers' brains are not fully developed until about age 25. And that means that teenagers have lower ability to control their impulses, lesser full appreciation for the consequences of their actions, which on the one hand makes them less responsible for their crimes, but on the other hand, it also makes them more malleable and more subject to rehabilitation than a fully grown adult. And so for those reasons, there are these middle ground cases where we want the option to do this hybrid blended sentencing approach. Now, it has been used in other states, I think, successfully. It's not currently the law in Tennessee. What Judge Sugarman and I are asking the state legislature to consider would be a pilot program focused just here on Shelby County for a couple of years. Let us try it and see if it works, and then maybe later on it could be expanded throughout the state.
Well, you have a book called Rethinking U.S. Election Law and Skewing the System.
Yeah.
What is it about?
It's basically about election reform. It tackles such questions as the Electoral College, gerrymandering, the imbalance in the Senate where a relatively rural red state like Wyoming has the same say in the U.S. Senate as a state like California, even though California is 60 times the population of Wyoming, and all of those issues. I think the main problem is that there are a number of instances in which the majority may want one party or one approach, but that's not what happens. So the majority may vote for one party, but another party controls the House. Or as often the case, a majority of the country wants one party to control the Senate, but that's not the party that controls the Senate. And as you full well know, sometimes the person that wins the popular vote doesn't end up being elected president. I think this is a problem. There are structural reasons baked into our system, into our Constitution, as what causes that, and the book discusses that and proposes solutions.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Murray.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Winners are being declared in elections across the country and right here in Tennessee. T-Alliance is back with the check at the local and state races.
I have a lot of local results. This time we're focusing on Collierville. Starting off with Collierville Alderman 1. Shelby Vogt is reporting with 12 precincts counted. Maureen Frazier is leading with 73% of the votes, while William Boone has 27% of the votes. This is a rematch from 2018 where Frazier beat Boone with 67.5% of the votes, and it looks like she may do it again. Moving on to Collierville Alderman position 2, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 12 precincts counted. Joy Jordan has 40% of the votes, while Billy Patton has 59% of the votes. Billy Patton was first elected to the board in 2010, and when Collierville enacted term limits, Patton said that he wasn't going to run because he respects term limits, but he changed his mind and is now hoping for a 4th term. Moving on to Collierville Alderman, position 4, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 12 precincts counted. Emily Fulmer has 26% of the votes, while Missy Marshall is leading with 74% of the votes. Marshall was first elected in 2020 through a special election to finish off the remaining 2 years of the late Alderman Tim Allen's term. Now she's hoping for a 4-year term. Moving on to Amendment number 2 for acting governor. Tennessean is reporting with 16% of the votes counted. It looks like 75% want to see this amendment go into action, while 25% of the people are voting no. Our next race for Collierville School Board position 2. Shelby Vogt is reporting with 12 precincts counted. Wanda Chisholm has 65% of the votes, while Alyssa Fowler has 34% of the votes. That's all the races that I have now. Back to you, Brandon.
Now, let's check in with Zabria McClain to get an update on the heated U.S. House races. Zabria?
Thank you, Brandon. We have some new results today, so let's start with Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. CNN is reporting with 61% of the votes counted. Democrat Tony Vargas has 50%, and Republican incumbent Don Bacon also has 50%. Now, the district is known as a swing district. Bacon is a 3-term incumbent who won his last election by over 4 percentage points, despite the fact that it was the only district in the state to swing for Biden. Vargas has leaned into issues like abortion, in addition to lowering prescription drugs and affordable health care, among others. Next up, we have Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. New York Times is reporting with 41% of the votes counted. Democrat Matt Cartwright has 56% of the votes, and Republican Jim Bonet has 44% of the votes. Now, like many races, this is a rematch of 2020, when Cartwright barely pulled off a win against Bonet. It's worth noting the district does lean to the right, and with Biden's approval numbers still sagging, Bonet might have a better chance of ousting Cartwright this time. Internal polling from both campaigns suggests the race remains close. Next, we have Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. Democrat Hillary Scholten has 58%, and Republican John Gibbs has 39%. Now, this is an open Republican seat. John Gibbs was a part of the Trump administration. He defeated pro-impeachment Representative Peter Meyer, who was running for re-election this year. This gives former DOJ attorney Hillary Scholten a chance to flip this seat in the newly drawn lines of the 3rd District. That's all I have for right now. I'll be back soon. But now, here's Colin Ewing, who has another check of the Senate races.
Thank you, Zabria. Currently, we have no results for Nevada, but I would like to talk about some of the candidates. First, Republican Adam Lazault is a hardline election denier and a law and order candidate. Republicans hope to continue building gains with Latino voters in the state by highlighting changes they make to the economic policy, but I don't think that's going to work with Democrat Mastow being the first ever Latina elected to the U.S. Senate. Now, moving on to Utah, currently there are no results in either, but this is an interesting race because Evan McMullen, a former Republican and now independent, won the backing of Utah's Democratic Party. He also ran for president in 2016. Meanwhile, Mike Lee, the incumbent, is a one-time critic of the former president who voted for McMullen in protest of Trump in 2016. Now, moving on to Georgia, ABC News is reporting with 79% of the votes that it is a tie, where Herschel Walker is up by a few hundred votes. Despite controversies, Walker has a slight edge in polls going into tonight. In Georgia, a nominee must cross the 50% threshold to win and avoid a runoff in December. Neither of the nominees have received this level of support in recent polls. Now onto Vermont. CNN is reporting with 18% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Democrat Peter Welch with 64% of the votes. Meanwhile, Gerald Malloy only has 32%. Now, onto Indiana. Fox News is reporting with 67% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Republican Todd Young, who has 60% of the votes. Meanwhile, Democrat Thomas McDermott only has 37%. Now, that is all the results I have for right now, but I'm going to toss things over to Maria Strickland, who has an update on the gubernatorial races.
Thanks, Colin. First up in Oregon, there is currently no projected winner, but this is a competitive three-way race to replace the term-limited Democratic governor. The presence of an independent candidate could cut into votes for Kotek and potentially benefit Drazen, a far-right Republican. Most recent polls have Drazen ahead by 2 points. Republicans have not won a governor's race since 1982. Up next in Nevada, the results aren't currently in, but Steve Sisolak was first elected in 2018. During his first term, he expanded mail-in voting, passed a new mining tax, and started a state public health insurance option. Joe Lovardo is the Clark County Sheriff and has deep ties in the state's most populous area. While he is endorsed by Trump, he is milder compared to MAGA candidates in Arizona and Pennsylvania. Most recent polling has Lovardo leading, but barely. Next up in Arizona, with no projected winner, Katie Hobbs is in the lead with 55.47 votes, while her opponent, Carrie Lake, has 44.53% of votes. Arizona is the epicenter of Trump's election denial. Katie Hobbs is the Secretary of State. She's made a name for herself after the last election for certifying the state's results as Trump peddled the baseless claim that he won it. Carrie Lake is a former news anchor who is also endorsed by Trump. She's an election denier and has said she will only accept the results if she wins. Lake was leading in polls going into tonight. Next up in New Mexico, Fox News with 42% of the votes counted. Michelle Grisham is in the lead with 57% of votes, while Mark Ronchetti only has 41% of the votes. That's all the results we have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Maria, out of all the races you're covering tonight, which ones seem to be the most interesting?
That's a good question, Brandon. Some of these races are really close. Take Oregon, for example, which we just talked about. This is one of the few times an independent is making a real run for governor. There are more registered Democrats than Republicans, but there are also 1 million registered voters with no party affiliation. Which way they swing tonight could be decisive. There's also the Georgia race, where incumbent Brian Kemp is once again facing Democratic challenger Stacey Abrams. This is a rematch from 2018 when Kemp won by just 2 percentage points. Abrams has spent the last 4 years pushing broader voting rights, so this will be a test of her message. Brandon?
Thanks for that, Maria. We have to take a break, but stay tuned to GHS-TV's live coverage of Election Night 2022.
I think that the visual arts really help students to develop a new vocabulary.
There's a lot of different ways that you can do art, so it's just a multimedia way of communicating and expressing yourself to other people.
At Germantown High School, we offer our introductory classes, which would be our Art 1 classes, Art 1 Honors, and then you would move up into Art 2, Art 2 Honors, and you can go towards the IB path, which would be what I teach, the International Baccalaureate Art classes, and we also have AP Art classes.
That's when you start being able to practice your skills on your own, so the skills that you learned freshman year, you get to start to kind of put them into practice and have a little bit more creative freedom.
At Germantown, we have, of course, all of the basic media, drawing, painting, all of that. But we can do a lot of printmaking. I do some fiber arts in my class, so we do, fiber design, fabric dyeing. We also have some sculptural media and processes that we explore through found object sculptures, some clay.
Even though I'm only a senior in high school, I feel like I'm a very sophisticated artist and ready to further that.
At some point in school, you're gonna have something that's gonna have to do with art. You're gonna have to make a poster, this, that, and the third, and you're gonna have these skills because you've taken this art class. You're gonna have new relationships with teachers that you might need later. It's just a big learning experience.
For more information about the Kappa program, visit GHS-Kappa.com or call 755-7775.
You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Welcome back to the final half hour of GHS-TV's live coverage of Election Night 2022. I'm your moderator, Brandon Sewell. Results are still coming in as we enter the final stretch. Tia Lyons is here with the latest state and local results.
I'm back with more local results, and this time we're focusing on Bartlett, starting off with the Bartlett mayor. Steve Hammonds is in the lead with 35% of the votes. I lied. David Parson is in the lead with 42% of the votes. Stephen Hammonds has 35% of the votes. Kevin Quinn has 21% of the votes, and John Lackey has 2% of the votes. This is an open seat because Mayor Keith McDonald is retiring after 20 years in office. While there are 4 candidates, it's worth noting that David Parsons was endorsed by McDonald. Moving on to Bartlett Alderman position 1, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 10 precincts counted. Starting off, Harold Brad King has 57% of the votes, so he's in the lead. While Casper Briggs has 18% of the votes, Jimmy Norman has 15% of the votes, and Victor Reed has 9% of the votes. This is a 4-way race, and it's an open seat. Moving on to Bartlett Alderman position 2, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 10 precincts counted. Robert Griffin has 52% of the votes. Stephen Spencer has 14% of votes, as well as Thomas Steffen Jr., and Brandon Wees has 19% of the votes. This is an open seat because incumbent Emily Elliott, who held the seat for 24 years, is retired. And she endorsed Robert Griffin for this race. Moving on to Bartlett Alderman position 3, Shelby Vogt is reporting with 10 precincts counted. That David Reeves has 62% of the votes and Paul Kaiser has 37% of the votes. That's all the races that I have for you right now. I'll be back shortly with one last look at local and state results. Now let's check in to see how the House races are stacking up. Hey, Zabria.
Hi, Tia. So first up, we have Pennsylvania's 17th congressional district, and CNN is reporting with 83% of the votes counted. Democrat Chris DeLuzio has 55%, and Republican Jeremy Schaefer has 45%. Now, attorney Christopher DeLuzio worked as an active duty naval officer and worked at the Brennan Center for Justice. DeLuzio advocates for what he calls fundamental rights, such as voting and abortion rights. Software engineer Jeremy Schaefer co-founded a software company. The race is a toss-up, according to the Cook Political Report, while 538 projects a Democratic win. Nevada's 3rd congressional district is up next. Fox News is reporting with 0% of those votes counted. But we do have this fight between Democratic incumbent Susie Lee and Republican April Becker. Incumbent Susie Lee was first elected in 2018. She leads a dropout prevention organization for the students of Nevada. April Becker lost the state Senate race by a single percentage point in 2020 and unsuccessfully sued afterward, alleging voter irregularities. Usually the home of the nail-biter elections, this district has become more winnable for Democrats following a redistricting process that shuffled more Democrats into its boundaries. Up next, we have New Jersey's 7th congressional district. New York Times is reporting with 58% of those votes counted. Democrat Tom Malinowski has 54%, and Republican Thomas Keene Jr. has 46%. That's all that we have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Representative David Kustoff will easily win re-election to Tennessee's 8th congressional district seat in D.C. He was first elected in 2016. I spoke with him about some of the issues of the day.
Thank you for joining me, Mr. Kustoff.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
So I want to first start off talking about what seems to be the buzzword this election, redistricting. How did your district change?
Yeah, so good question. You know, Tennessee has 9 congressmen, and I represent the 8th congressional district. So right now with redistricting and the population growth, a lot of the population growth in Middle Tennessee, there was a decrease in West Tennessee and some stagnancy. So I've lost about half of Tipton County and half of Bartlett, got 5 new counties, and kept most of East Shelby County. So East Memphis, kept all of Germantown, all of Collierville, Arlington, Lakeland, but in the end will represent about 767,000 people, which is it's a tremendous honor.
Well, Mr. Kustoff, what are your priorities when it comes to the state of Tennessee?
Well, good question. The committee that I'm on in the House of Representatives is the Ways and Means Committee. So it's the oldest committee in the House of Representatives, the only committee mentioned in the Constitution, and that committee has jurisdiction over tax, trade, health, the entitlement programs like Social Security. So I've got a lot of interest in those issues. But, you know, as I've been traveling around West Tennessee in the 8th Congressional District, the things that people are talking to me the most about, it's the economy and inflation. It's really a tough time right now economically for a lot of people. Crime and the border. So looking for solutions to those issues and so many more, but really what can we do economically to turn things around where people don't have to stretch their dollar as much to provide for their families?
Well, I would like to turn now to education. You saw the implementation of the Tennessee Promise and Tennessee Reconnect programs. How does education play a role in your goals as a U.S. representative?
It's really big, and you talked about Tennessee Promise for a moment. So, as you know, with what's been implemented under Governor Haslam and Governor Lee, and when I was part of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, there was the thinking that not everybody wants to go to a four-year school after they graduate from high school. And so if they don't want to, what can we do as a state to make sure that people have the skills and the tools so that they can get good jobs, whether it be an electrician, plumber, you name it, good jobs, those skilled jobs, and kind of be ready set, so that the Tennessee Promise program allows young people, and those maybe who aren't so young, but those who graduate from high school, to go to a two-year school or go to a technical school at no cost. Get those skills so that they can get really good jobs and come out with no debt.
So charter schools are a controversial topic in the state. It seems like Republicans are for and Democrats are against. You, however, are in favor of public schools.
Well, I'm in favor of public schools. I'm also in favor of charter schools. I think that people and parents should be able to have the choice where their child wants to go to school. And it may be, I mean, here you are, you're at Germantown High School. This is a great facility. You've got a one-of-a-kind TV studio where people like you can learn the broadcasting and the production side. You've got a lot of opportunities here. There may be students around the state that maybe they're assigned to a high school and it has not been a strong performer. To give those students the opportunity to go to a school where they can get a good education, I talked about win-win a moment ago. I think that's a win-win. But I'm also very proud of Germantown High School. I'm very proud of the municipal high schools around Shelby County, and I'm a product of White Station High School. So let's give as many opportunities to people as we can give, to the families and to the students.
Well, regarding education, what is the Republican solution for bringing down the price to go to college?
Yeah, well, that's something that Republicans talk about a lot. I'm sure Democrats talk about it as well. I think it's wholly unfair that you've got a student who wants to go to a four-year school and they could be saddled with a lot of debt just because they want to do it. These colleges, they need to be competitive with each other. And thankfully there's schools, public schools and private schools, universities and colleges. They built up endowments and they give scholarships and other aid to students to bring that down. When I talk to recent graduates and they talk about the amount of debt that they've accumulated, that doesn't seem fair to give somebody a diploma after 4 years and say, you now have a debt of blank. Shouldn't be that way. So the colleges themselves and the universities, they've got to continue to look for solutions to hold the tuitions steady, if you will, not increase. And at least in Tennessee, I'll talk about the Tennessee public schools, like the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, like the University of Tennessee at Martin, like the University of Memphis, where I'm a graduate of. They've done a good job in recent years in making sure that they haven't been increasing tuition. And I know that's a challenge again with the inflation that we're experiencing now.
looking ahead to 2023, if Republicans take back the House, which they are predicted to do, what are the first issues you'd like the party to tackle?
Yeah. So again, to me, it's all about inflation and the economy. It's the number one issue. When people are talking to me about how expensive gas and groceries are, then you know it's real. So what can we do to help reduce this inflationary impact on the American people? That'll be among the first course of business in a Republican-led Congress.
Well, Mr. Kustoff, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Good. Thank you for having me on. This was really good and informative. You've asked great questions, so thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you today.
We reached out to Lynette Williams, Mr. Kustoff's opponent, for an interview and didn't get a response. Now, let's see how the battle for the Senate is going. Colin Ewing has a final look at tonight's results.
Thank you, Brandon. Currently in Pennsylvania, CNN is reporting with 56% of the votes counted that John Fetterman has 51% of the votes. Meanwhile, Mehmet Oz only has 47%. Now, Oz has gotten flack from Fetterman's campaign for living in New Jersey for years and for seemingly moving to Pennsylvania just ahead of his Senate run. While John Fetterman has had an economic populist message throughout his campaign, so it will be interesting to see if it resonated with Trump voters. Now, moving on to Wisconsin, Fox News is reporting with 52% of the votes counted that right now the percentages are a tie, but Mandela Barnes is up by 7,038 votes. If Barnes were to win, he likely increased Democratic support for changing filibuster rules and would take out a Republican who's frequently blocked spending on social programs. Now, moving on to Arizona, CNN is reporting with 42% of the votes counted that right now Mark Kelly has 56% of the votes. Meanwhile, Blake Masters only has 42%. We may not know who wins this race until tomorrow. The previous two Senate elections were both decided by 2.4 percentage points. Now, moving on to Maryland, Fox News is reporting with 52% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Chris Van Hollen, who has 61% of the votes. Meanwhile, Chris Chaffee only has 39%. Now, on to New York. Fox News is reporting with 35% of the votes counted that the projected winner is Charles Schumer, who has 66% of the votes. Meanwhile, Republican Joe Pine only has 34%. Now, moving towards Louisiana, ABC News is projecting that Republican John Kennedy is the winner with 66% of the votes, while Luke Mixon has 11% and incumbent Gary Chambers has 16% of the votes. More results are coming in for the nation's gubernatorial races. Here's Maria Strickland with an update.
Thank you, Colin. First up in South Dakota, there is currently no projected winner, but with 22% of the votes counted, incumbent Republican Kristi Noem is in the lead with 63% of the votes, while Jamie Smith has 34% of the votes. Incumbent Kristi Noem was first elected in 2018 in an extremely close race. She is the state's first female governor. She has closely aligned herself with Trump since she ran for office. Jamie Smith is the minority leader of the South Dakota House. Noem is favored to win re-election. Next up in Texas, CNN with 62% of the votes counted, incumbent Greg Abbott is in the lead with 54% of the votes, while Beto O'Rourke only has 45% of the votes. Incumbent Greg Abbott is running for a third term. There are no term limits in Texas. He has pushed to secure the southern border. In April, he chartered buses to send illegal immigrants from Texas to D.C. to make a point. O'Rourke is a former House member. He famously ran against Senator Ted Cruz and lost by just 3 points. He said Abbott's conduct in the aftermath of the Robb Elementary shooting, which left 21 dead, including 19 children, should disqualify him from serving in the state's top job. Next up in Arkansas, with 55% of the votes counted, Chris Jones is losing against Mike Huckabee Sanders, who has 60% of the votes. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was the press secretary under Trump, and her father is a former Arkansas governor. All polls have Sanders winning by 20 points. Chris Jones actually has never held political office before. That's all the results we have for right now. Back to you, Brandon.
Germantown Mayor Mike Palazzolo will serve another 4-year term, as no one stepped forward to challenge a 2-term mayor. It was a different scenario from 2018, when just 120 votes separated Palazzolo and his challenger, then Alderman John Bariza. I recently sat down with the mayor in his office to discuss his vision for Germantown. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mayor Palazzolo.
My pleasure, and welcome to my office and to City Hall as well.
Thank you, thank you. So this is your 3rd time running for mayor. What has been your objective this time around?
Well, primarily it has been to listen, learn, and lead. And my first 2 terms in office, they were learning experiences for me as an individual, as a person, as a leader. And I've learned a lot over those first 2 terms. And primarily the thing I've learned the most is that to be accepting of a lot of different viewpoints, opinions, and try to gather as much information as possible. And then seek some good guidance from trusted advisors and also important and very well qualified people here at the city to help make great decisions. So those are some of the things that I've learned in over the last few years as mayor.
So you have no challenger for the first time. Has fact made you rethink parts of your campaign?
Well, I tell you, not having a challenger or an opponent is something very new for me. This is my 7th election. I lost my first one, and I've been successful with each one moving forward. They've been different types of elections and different types of battles and those type things. I've just learned a lot about my community over those times. Have I changed some things personally? Yes. Not having an opponent, I have done different things. I started going door to door in February, and I went door to door and knocked on doors and did my normal routine and my normal game plan, if you want to put it that way. Then when I got the news at the filing deadline, I had no opponent. I continued to do a lot of door to door, but not at the same pace. Today I've been at early voting, and I will be at early voting all day tomorrow. I want people to know that even though I don't have an opponent, I'm still going to work hard and greet them at the polling place.
So what are the biggest issues in Germantown that you will tackle during your 2nd term?
Well, it's pretty simple to me. Is we have 4 core priority areas, and they're really in somewhat this level of importance. Our number 1 priority is public safety in our city, and that's something we have to focus on day in and day out. Our residents, that is something that they look toward us to provide for them. So they have the expectation that they're going to be safe at home, they're going to be safe at work, they're going to be safe at where they worship, where they go to school, where they play. And so that's a big focus for us. Public infrastructure is another one. That's paving roads, making sure intersections are safe, drainage is as modern as possible. We're building a new water tower, which will add resiliency in our community and give us 2 water sources. So those are things that are very important. Public parks, we're going to build a new 50-acre premium performance park out in southeast Germantown near the intersection of Forest Hill and Winchester. We're redoing Cameron Brown Park, the baseball fields. We're about to do a groundbreaking or a ribbon cutting Saturday at Germantown Park. It's the name of the neighborhood is Germantown Park. And so those things are very important, and in public schools as well. So our GMSD schools are important. We are doing an addition at Houston Middle School, and there's also a long-term plan to kind of remodel, redevelop Houston High School. So those 4 Ps, public safety, public infrastructure, public parks, and public schools, are very important for my next term.
So when you look back on your first 2 terms, is there anything you wish you would have done?
Well, you always have, certain things you look back on and maybe you would have done it a little bit differently. By and large, the plan, our long-term strategic plan that we have in place called Germantown Forward 2035, if we follow that plan, then, it's not necessarily about what, a particular mayor wants to do. It's really about if you follow the plan, all right, the strategic plan, and your board of mayor and aldermen work together with city administration, then you implement that plan, and it should be somewhat seamless. Occasionally, you wish that, perhaps we had moved a little quicker on doing some park upgrades here, or maybe doing a little bit different on paving, those type things, but they're not large areas that you go, oh my goodness, we really missed the boat on that. And so, we're just going to continue to work the plan and plan the work, and that'll mean for a good community.
How has your relationship with the aldermen developed and changed since you took office?
Well, and that's a great question. I'll be honest with you. This will be finishing up year 18 in public office, 10 years as an alderman, 8 years as a mayor with another, hopefully I'm reelected, and I voted for myself. So unless there's a write-in candidate, you know, you learn over time that as an alderman, you know, you're part of the legislative portion of governing. You know, in the grand scheme, you've got an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And so the aldermen are the legislators, and so you bring to them projects for the people, and they either approve them or they decline them. They're very instrumental in the budgeting process because that's how we build the plan from the ground up. And so having a great relationship with the aldermen, having mutual respect, and we've got a really good team right now. They all kind of play on their strengths and they understand where they may have some weaknesses. And so I think what I see in some of the aldermen, their relationships, there's maybe an alderman that has more experience in real estate. And so they look to that person for some mentoring or guidance. They see another alderman that's very strong in finance and budget. They look to that alderman for what that person thinks. We've got one that's very strong in parks. We have others that are strong in our neighborhood, fabric of our neighborhood. They all work pretty well together, and we've started to do more vision sessions. In the old days, we called them work sessions, or we call them board retreats. And you know, I'm a former coach, and not to be military in terminology, my belief is we never retreat. We don't retreat. We move forward. And so we have vision sessions, and we move that forward. Our strategic plan is called Germantown Forward 2035. We don't have retreats, we have vision plans. And so we've been meeting together more and bringing forth ideas. And so that's been something that's caused this board to be a pretty good team.
Well, it is always a pleasure to speak with you, Mayor Palazzolo. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming to City Hall. I really do appreciate GHS-TV and all the work that you do on election coverage and all the other work you do in the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Our time tonight is winding down. Let's get a wrap-up of the night with state and local races anchor, Tia Lyons.
Hey Brandon, the votes for the Bartlett mayor are still being calculated, but David Parsons is the projected winner with a 7% lead. Turning to our constitutional amendments, the Right to Work Amendment passed with 70% of the votes. The Acting Governor Amendment, which sets in place a line of succession, passed. The Remove Slavery as Punishment for Crime also passed. And lastly, the Remove Religious Minister Disqualification Amendment passed. Before I send it back to Brandon, in District 86, the late Barbara Cooper won, which means Democrats appoint someone else to fill her seat until a special election. That's all from the local and state races. Back to you, Brandon.
This year's midterms were expected to shake up one, if not both, chambers of Congress. Zabria has a final rundown of the hot House races.
Hey Brandon, we're approaching the end of election night 2022 and we are still waiting on a few House races to be called. However, it looks like the momentum may be in the Republicans' favor. They could have enough excitement behind them to take control of the House after key wins in Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District and New York's 22nd Congressional District. Brandon, back to you.
Now, let's turn to the U.S. Senate with anchor Colin Ewing. What trend have you seen throughout the night?
Hey Brandon, as we are closing in on the end of election night 2022, we are still waiting for many races to be called. However, looking at the data, it looks like the shift may be in the Republicans' favor. After key wins in Ohio and North Carolina, they could have enough leverage to take the Senate. Back to you, Brandon.
And finally, let's see how those gubernatorial races are playing out with anchor Maria Strickland.
Hey Brandon, it looks as if voters were buying what the Republican Party was selling. The GO picked up no new seats, but have won 11 seats so far. The Biden backlash seems to be real. Without the Democrats having Trump as a motivator to rally their base, they had an uphill battle in several states. There are still some states that haven't been called, but again, it looks like we will have more Republicans living in governor mansions across the country. Back to you, Brandon.
Thanks, Maria. Tonight's elections remind us of all the great democratic traditions of our country. I want to take a second to thank the guests who we interviewed and our production crew for making this production possible. I hope you've enjoyed our show. Be sure to join us in November 2024 when GHS-TV takes you through another night of exciting election coverage. And please, don't wait 2 years to tune in again. GHS-TV has many wonderful local shows just like this one all season long on GHSTV.org, where we are streaming 24 hours a day. On behalf of all of tonight's anchors and the entire crew, thank you for watching Germantown High School's live coverage of Election Night 2022. Have a great evening.